Thanks very much, and it's really great to be here. Can I just ask, I'm not at the moment using the microphone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay, that's fine. It's just too many things to hold. So if I mutter, then you'll just have to ask me to repeat myself. It's absolutely great to be here, it really is. Thanks very much for the invitation. I should probably say I was the first person to use interactive computer marked assessment. I am not the technical driver. I did it for reasons to do with teaching, which I'll come on to in a minute. I want to start by just reflecting on why all of this matters. Now, there's a number of quotes on the screen which won't surprise any of you. It's things to do with the fact that, you know, it's the assessment driving learning, those sorts of things which you'll be very familiar with. We may not like that. We may not like that. We may not think it's right that assessment drives learning in the way that it does, but it does. And I'm particularly taken by the David Bowd quote there, that actually students can't get away from assessment. It is there. It's really, really important that what we do is right. And the sword that's appeared as I was talking is to do with the fact that when we're talking about e-assessment, it's a particular, if you like, dangerous tool. It can be really, really effective if you get it right, but if you get it wrong, it can be particularly dangerous. And again, I'll explain why that is as I go. That's what I'm going to do in the talk. I am focusing on computer marked assessment, interactive computer marked assessment delivered online. Just to emphasise, it's only one of the very large number of e-assessment or technology enhanced assessment tools that we've got available to us. We've had lots and lots of interesting talks during the day about all of the sorts of means that are available to us. A lot of those we do at the Open University, but that's not what I'm talking about. They're very important. This is only one small aspect of it, but it is what I'm talking about. And what I'm really going to do is talk about the way in which we can improve what we do, basically using technology to do a better job. And I'm going to be talking in very general terms. I'm going to try not to be context specific, to talk in ways that don't depend on what particular technology you're using. However, context is important just to set the scene for what any of us do. And I was just the person I was just talking to was just saying, you know, didn't know a lot about the Open University. Some of you will know lots, some of you tutor for us, some of you will know very little. I just want to emphasise 3 points from that slide and say a little bit more. The first thing which will become very relevant is that we are a very big university. So the modules I'm talking about have sort of up to about 4,000 students a year, between sort of several hundred and several thousand students a year. That will become relevant. The other two things that are relevant, one is that we are completely open in our undergraduate curriculum. In other words, our students may have literally no entry qualifications when they come to us and may not have studied for a long time. That's also relevant. And the final one is that our students are studying at a distance. So although they've got tutors, they haven't got the sort of daily contact with tutors that is the case in a conventional university. And the other thing is just to tell you what the underpinning technological things I'm talking about are. We actually used a system called OpenMark that I was involved as the academic lead on the development of, which informed the development of the Moodle quiz engine, which we're the global maintainers of. So as I say, the technology itself doesn't matter, but just to set the scene, that is what I'm talking about. And just because the OU does jargon really well, and I might just slip into it, the things I'm talking about are TMA equals tutor marked assignment and ICMA equals interactive computer marked assignment. So why do it? Why bother with using computer marked assessment? Well, people talk about some of the things that are up there. People talk about it saving time, saving money. I'll challenge that in a minute. They talk about it being, you know, constructive alignment with online teaching. Interestingly, computer marked assessment in the sense of the old, you know, fill in the blank with a piece of paper sort of things that most of you will have met, were introduced in the 1930s as a way of making assessment more objective, because people had realised that human marking of essays was fallible, and so they were doing this to try and make the process more objective. And the other sorts of ways are the opportunity to just keep on providing people with feedback time and time again, to give them extra opportunities to practice so they can keep on doing the questions and the computer doesn't get tired like a human marker does. And things to do with motivating students. And the final thing I'll be talking about is where we go over into the area of learning analytics, actually seeing how people are engaging with learning. And I'll talk about that during the talk. Don't know how well you can see this. It was a Wordle just around the sort of reasons why people might use computer marked assessment. And the one that I find particularly interesting, it's up there, the yellow one, feedback's private. And that's something that the literature's just beginning to consider around computer marked assessment. It's basically sometimes people find that if you're being marked by a human marker, you may feel a bit of an idiot. And so actually there are sometimes, there's another advantage that sometimes if you're being marked by a computer, nobody knows what's going on. But there are disadvantages. There are disadvantages in using computer marked assessment, and I think those are the main ones that are cited. It may be, particularly if you're just using multiple choice questions, there's arguments to do with that it's encouraging a surface approach to learning, particularly that it may not be authentic. And the other one that's interesting, it's the other side of that point I've just made about the learning in private. When you're doing a computer marked assessment, in principle, there isn't a person in the middle. So there's not somebody there saying, okay, that student's having a really, really rough time. Let me just be a little bit gentler on how I go. So it's quite difficult to deliver that level of personalisation in that way. It's not difficult to deliver personalised feedback, but it can be difficult to know who the student is that you're dealing with. Right. I offer these next couple of slides with a health warning. The health warning will come in a minute. But what we did was, I've done masses of evaluation of our use of computer marked assessment in all sorts of ways. And one of those things has been the usual, send people questionnaires and then interview them. And I offer those as comments from some of our students about what they thought about some of our computer marked assessment. And the words that are significant are highlighted. It's really unfair. It's petty. These were not happy students. Right, I said there was a health warning. The health warning is that actually what happened was we sent a questionnaire to all of our students. We had, I think, 4 negative comments out of several hundred. And the research methodology that we're using meant that we actually interviewed all of those 4 people. And what we discovered was that they were, it's a sample of 4, but they were the 4 unhappy people. They were all perfectly happy with the general principle of computer marked assessment, but there were details that had really, really upset them. So, if you like, my thesis in the talk is that the devil's in the detail, in getting it right. And in general terms, our students are really, really happy because of this aspect of it being fun, and this was for a summative assessment. Okay, so a high-stakes summative assessment, it was fun. It feels as if I've won the lottery. It's not just like a multiple guess type question, it's more sophisticated than that. And the idea, again, remember these students of ours who are at a distance, the idea of building confidence, more being like an online tutorial. So, in principle, you can get happy students as well. And to just go on from what I was saying before, where that's coming from really is that not all computer marked assessments are the same. And what I'm going to go on to do is to talk about the ways in which we can improve the quality of what we do. So, and I'm going to identify 4 different things to do. The first one is to think about what you're doing, why you're doing it. The second one is using a range of question types. Third one's writing better questions. And finally, and I think vitally importantly, it's using an iterative design process. So this is just me talking now. This is why I use computer marked assessment. Yes, I was the first person to use computer marked assessment interactive online computer modeled assessment in my teaching at the OU. It was back in 2000 and, well, it was for a module that started in 2002. I did it purely because I wanted to be able to give people instantaneous targeted feedback, where at the moment I am talking about feedback as something that we're giving to people, and I'll come back to that point as well. And as Jill said this morning, various frameworks for the sorts of things that make assessment work. I'm here referring to Gibson-Simpson, but similarly, Nicoll and McFarlane-Dick, there's similar things. It's the idea of this giving people a chance to learn from the thing and have another go while they're still remembering the question that they did. So that was why I did it. However, in our context with large student numbers, that module that I wrote the assessment for, started in 2002, has now had more than 15,000 students through it. And it doesn't use human markers, it's all done online. And I think I've probably saved my university about £100,000. I wish they'd give it me. But, you know, there are, in particular circumstances, it can save money, but that's in very particular circumstances, and it's not been my driver. So I'm going to go on to talk about the ways in which I think it's really important to embed the assessment within what you're doing. So classically, what we would do, that's a classic one of our module websites. Wendy, it's from your faculty, not mine. Okay, and it's looking at the ways in which we embed the assessments. There's a practice quiz down there, a student's getting the assessment as part of the learning thing. It's not an add-on, it's part of the whole package. This is a screenshot from the Open Science Laboratory, which has recently won Times Higher Award. And it's basically there where we're doing these little bits of interactive science that we're wanting people to do. We're actually putting the questions really, really close to the activity. So, for example, we've written some questions to go with a virtual microscope. There's absolutely no point having the questions at the top level. They want to be in there close to the activity that the students are doing. And this is the final example of the importance of embedding the quizzes. Here, this is something that we do for diagnostic purposes. This is to do with getting students in the right module at the right time. And people are interested in the feedback, both at the question level, which is what I'll be talking about, but also the way in which the whole thing adds together to give feedback on the whole of the quiz. So that was the first thing, the importance of getting the, thinking about how you're using assessment in the first instance. The second one is importance of using a range of question types. Now here, obviously, it depends what particular software you're using, what VLE you're using, what tools you've got available to you. But most of the commercial systems these days have a huge range of question types available. I'm sure people know what multiple choice is. Multiple response is ones where you're choosing more than one option. Drag and drop's obvious. Matching is where you're matching two answers together. True, false is obvious. Hotspot, I call it pin the tail on the donkey. It's where you're looking for the right place on a graph or an image. What we've basically developed, particularly at the OU, is the use of free text. In other words, and the words that are used are that's constructed response. Students are constructing their own response rather than selected response, rather than selecting options. And I'm just going to demonstrate three different systems. I'll show slides, I think I'll show screenshots of the first two and then go out live for the third one. So I'm just going to show you the general principle of one of our assessment questions. This is the kind of technology that I inherited. So these are old questions. So it's a really, really simple question. Somebody's being asked to add two fractions, but they're not choosing an option. They're putting in numbers in boxes. First attempt, they're just told they're wrong. The second attempt, they're given a hint. And the significant thing is that the hint is targeted to whatever the error was. So in this particular instance, rather than adding the two fractions, the students multiply the two fractions and they're told that. And at the third try, whether they're right or wrong, they're given a full answer and a reference to the teaching material. It's the first example. The other thing to bear in mind is that all of these questions have multiple variants. So not everybody will see the same question. That's an anti-plagiarism device. And if we're using them purely formatively, then they can practice them until they like, really. The second example I'm going to show is a system called STACK, which was based by Chris Sanguin, who was at the University of Birmingham when he did the work. He's now at Loughborough, and I believe he's moving to Edinburgh in the autumn. Now this looks the same. It looks as if it's more difficult maths, but basically you're being asked a question, you're putting in an answer with free text, and at the first attempt you're being told that you're wrong. And at the second attempt you're still wrong, but you're getting targeted feedback. The answer's right, apart from it needs a constant of integration. And the third attempt, the student's got it right and is told they've got it right. The difference is what's going on behind the scenes, and this is where we do need to begin to use tools that are more powerful. Whereas with the first open mark question that I've shown you, the author, as in me, had worked out all the possible answers that the student would give and put those in, this has got computer algebra going on behind the scenes. So we are not actually having to work out all the possible answers for that question. We're using technology effectively to be able to do that for us. The third example I want to show you, there will be a slight delay. Oh, amazingly, there won't. Maybe there will. No, wants me to sign in again. Okay. Now, these are the sorts of questions that I developed as part of a teaching fellowship at the OU. And what we're doing here is we're actually asking the student to type in a short free text answer. So you can begin to see how far removed this is from a multiple choice question. You can also begin to see how nervous it makes me trying to type in an answer as I go. Okay, so we're being asked so we're doubling the distance between two electrically charged particles. I'm just going to say it will decrease. Okay, and what I'm trying to get at is here we are giving targeted feedback. So it's not that it will decrease is a wrong answer, it's just not really quite got enough information. So let me try again. Let me try it will halve. Okay, so I'm still not right, but it realises I've said it'll get less, but it's not got it quite right in quite the right way. And let me say it will reduce by a factor of 4. Okay, I've got it right. Now, clearly, the answer matching that's going on behind the scenes there is, you would think, really very sophisticated. I can tell you that that is no longer the case. It's really, really simple software that we've got there. It's a system called PMatch or Pattern Match, which is really just looking for the patterns in students' answers. Having said that, it's not a simple bag of words system. It's not just looking for keywords. If it was just looking for keywords, we've got a question that talks about a ball being thrown up into the air. And the right answer is something to do with the gravitational, the kinetic energy of motion, being converted into potential energy as the ball moves upwards. A lot of students genuinely give the answer the wrong way round. They say that it's about potential energy, gravitational potential energy being converted to kinetic energy. So in other words, there is a completely wrong answer that has all the right words in it but not in the right order. So you do just need to be able to deal with that, the order in which the words appear. You also need to be able to deal with negation. There's another question, I'm just wondering, Heather, if you recognise it. There's another question which is to do with a snowflake that's falling at constant speed. It asks, what does that tell you about the forces on the snowflake? The correct answer is that the forces are balanced. People tend to give things as double negatives, so you have to be able to mark there are no unbalanced forces acting, right? But also you have to be able to mark there are no balanced forces as wrong. So you do have to be able to get a certain level of sophistication. And the way we've achieved that is actually basing the answer matching on real student responses. If we hadn't done that, it wouldn't work. So happy to talk more about that when we get on to questions, but for the moment, let me go back to my PowerPoint. This is where you discover I'm not a technical person. I carry screenshots because I'm terribly nervous. Right. So I've shown 3 fairly sophisticated question types. The depressing thing is, for all that, colleague Tim Hunt looked at all the questions in use, all the Moodle questions in use across the Moodle community, and yes, 75% of them are multiple choice. And I think that's the same for all systems. And in fact, if you add in all of the other selected response type questions, it gets to somewhere around about 90%. So I can't say I like multiple choice questions. I think it might have got a bit obvious as I've been talking. And the main reason I don't, there's all sorts of issues to do with being able to work the answer backwards and all of those sorts of things and getting the clues. But the main point is that they're not what you'd call authentic. It's basically in real life, you don't go into the doctor and say, excuse me, Dr. Blah, is what's wrong with me A, B, C, D or E? Just doesn't happen like that. I have in the past been quite damnatory about multiple choice questions. I'm mellowing in my old age. I do think that even using really simple multiple choice questions, we can deliver quite a lot. Black and William, the idea of moments of contingency, just having, if you ask the right question at the right time, you can still trigger quite deep learning. And similarly, Steve Draper's concept of catalytic assessment, in other words, same idea, that you're asking a simple question, but it's leading to significant learning. So, even with simple multiple choice questions, there are good questions and there are not good questions. I'm sure lots of you have seen things like this before, but these are my examples and I have 3 of them, right? Okay, folks, what's the answer to that question? It's in nonsense, but what's the answer? D. Yeah? Are we agreed it's D? It's D for 2 reasons. The first is that all of the other options are about a colour. Red, blue, yellow, green. Option D is about size. So it's a characteristically different response. But the main thing is, as academics, we have to justify ourselves all the time. So they couldn't just put it's smaller. They have to explain why it's smaller in self-justification. Don't do it. Okay. Anybody? That's a bit harder, a bit more difficult. Anybody like? Sorry. It's TANAG. Yes, it is indeed. Why? It says A and A. It's not using, it would be Anne. It would be Anne Elland, Anne Angaster, Anne. So it's using the language to judge it. This one actually, I meant to change it and I forgot. Okay, I'm sorry. This one isn't quite as obvious. The point I'm making here is that when you're asking for multiple options, sometimes you can't have 2 of them being true at once. So you couldn't have option 1 and option 4 at the same time because A can't be both bigger than B and smaller than B. So you are giving hints just in the way the response is set together. And if I'd said which 3 of the following are correct, it would actually have to be 1, 2 and 3. Options A, B and there's 3 of those. So when I'm working with novice question writers and writing this sort of question, the sorts of things that we do are, I've talked about, make sure that you know why you're doing it. Don't just go use this technology, think about why you want to do it. Think about the question type you want to use. Make sure that the question's really carefully worded. I've only just touched on that in those last things, but it's incredibly common for people to ask really rather silly things. We do it in tutor-marked assessment as well. We ask daft questions and wonder why we get daft answers. The difference, of course, here is it's back to that very sharp sword. Because there's not somebody in the middle, You know, there's not somebody to be able to say, well, this question doesn't make sense, this is what it means. So getting the question wording, getting the feedback wording right is really, really important. And then I would say check them again and get somebody else to check them. And it's an iterative process, and that comes on to my final point, which is the ways in which we've monitored student performance on the questions leading into the whole assessment analytics thing. I'm just looking at time. I'm okay still, aren't I, for the moment? Right, so the sort of most simple way we've done it is actually look at what wrong answers students give. And again, with free text answers, they're actually telling you something. The example that we've got on the screen there is something that we had not thought of. We'd thought about when asked to add two fractions that people would multiply them, that they would add the numerators and denominators separately. But actually what they've done here, we kept getting these answers that in all variants were half what they should be. And it turned out that what the students are doing is they're writing the thing as a common, giving a common denominator. So they're expressing those two fractions as 14 over 21 and 15 over 21. And then they're adding the numerators and denominators separately. So we learned something about what students are doing wrong. We were actually able to change our teaching text as a result of that. So you do learn quite a lot about what's going on. This is the other one I want to talk about at length, and then I'll just shoot through the other examples of the sort of analysis we've done. This one needs a little bit of explanation. You've seen that students have 3 goes at the questions. What we've got here, and I'll try not to fall over this as I step out, sorry. Right, so first go, green is right, red is wrong, and orange and yellow are wrong as well. So the sort of reddy type colours mean that they've got it wrong. And grey is where they've left the answer box completely blank. They haven't put an answer in at all. And where you've got the same colour repeating from first to second to third, it means that exactly the same response is put in. Right, my challenge to you on this, and it's a much broader point than to do with just this sort of assessment. If we ask students, and it's the same if you ask them about any intervention, oh, did you find the feedback useful? I can tell you that between 90% and 93% of your students will say, oh yes, we found the feedback useful. It carries right across the literature. It carries right across the literature in people's engagement with sort of medical interventions, all those sorts of things as well. When you look at what's actually going on, I can test it's a little bit different. I don't think those students are finding the feedback useful because they're not actually using it. They're giving exactly the same answers at first, second and third response. Now, those are 2 different questions. We also get a difference depending on what mode of assessment we're using the questions in. But the effect by question is by far and away the most marked. Depends partly on the complexity of the question, what other resources they have to go and use. I'm going to have to climb over this again now, excuse me. But it also, most importantly, I think there's something wrong with that question on this side. Students, it's like, I haven't got a clue type response. They don't understand the feedback. I'm going to skip through the next 2 slides. At least I will if I can move on at all. It's to do with impact of deadlines. If you have hard deadlines for the quizzes, people do them. If you don't, they don't. Right. What I think that with all of that time and effort that we've put in, I think the outcome's quite good. Our students like it, works quite well. But I would say it has taken us a lot of time, cost us a lot of money. For us, that wasn't too bad because we've got all of those students, so you can justify the upfront expense. Not everybody has those student numbers. I have 2 solutions to offer for this problem. And the first one comes back on to something that we were talking about this morning with the idea of assessing MOOCs. I would love to see assessment for a MOOC that goes something like this. You ask the questions and you use peer marking to develop which of the answers are the right answers and which are the wrong answers, because there, with just pure strength of numbers, you get some indication. And then I would like to see us using machine learning to develop the rules rather than me sitting at home doing it. So that's the first possibility. The second possibility, we might just talk to each other and share questions. We tend not to do that. We tend not to share questions very well. And a colleague of mine, when asked about this, said, it's one of those things everybody thinks we ought to do. It's such a good idea, but in practice we just don't do it. And we explored the reasons. It's partly technically a technical thing. It's partly that some of the questions we write are system dependent. I think that's probably a bit of a white elephant, but it is there. I think a deeper problem is that we tend to want to ask questions that are specific to our own context. And I think that the answer to that is that we should actually be sharing if you like, the code behind the questions and allowing people to edit them for their own use. And my final slide is, you probably thought by now that I'm a complete technical, convert, and I think all of this is wonderful. Actually, I don't. It's technically possible. There are systems, things like eRater, that are extremely good at marking, let's say, essays. Paradoxically, the answer matching for electronically marking an essay is easier than the answer matching that I've shown you with short answer questions. It has to do with the fact if you're marking for content that you've got these great long things, and you can actually just mark for keywords. The systems are technically really good for marking for style, because they mark on proxies, they mark on the punctuation, they mark on what somebody's put into the essay. But the trouble is that you're not actually marking what it is the student's doing. And my personal feeling is that for things like essays, for problem solving, those sorts of things, that actually we shouldn't be using. It's okay to do it for feedback, but I think there is a limit, and I think we shouldn't go over that limit. And actually, it's a quoting yourself, it's a bit sad, isn't it? But I think that what we should be doing is using computer marked assessment to mark the simple things, to give the feedback. And this comes back to this idea that's come up several times today, as feedback as an iterative process, not as something that I give to you. I think that we should still be doing that. I think that all I'm doing with this sort of question is basically, this is what's right and this is why, but that then in conversation with people, with tutors, that's where the deep learning goes on. So my theory is that we should be using this sort of thing as a way into learning and just to free up time, if you like, for the more sophisticated tasks. The presentation ends with references, which obviously will be available to you. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.